Imagine walking through a forest 50,000 years ago. You hear footsteps behind you. You turn around, and there's another human standing between the trees. But something is wrong. They don't look exactly like you. They're shorter and much more powerfully built. Their face is different. Their brow is heavier. Their body looks designed for a world of cold, ice, and enormous animals. They are watching you, and you're watching them. For most of human history, this wouldn't have been impossible, because we were not the only humans on Earth. For hundreds of thousands of years, different human lineages lived across Africa, Europe, and Asia at the same time. Some hunted the same animals. Some used fire. Some made tools. Some buried their dead. And some even had children with our ancestors. Today, only one human species remains. Us, Homo sapiens. But once, the human family tree looked very different. And the strangest part is this. Some of these other humans didn't simply disappear before we arrived. We actually lived alongside them. So who were they? What were they like? Did they compete with us? Did they fear us? Did they fight us? And most importantly, what happened to them? Let's start with the human species everyone has heard of, the Neanderthals. For a long time, popular culture treated Neanderthals like primitive cavemen. Slow, stupid, almost human. That picture is badly outdated. Neanderthals were humans. They belonged to their own branch of the human family tree, and they survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They lived across Europe and parts of Western Asia, and they were extremely well adapted to their environment. Imagine a Neanderthal standing beside a modern human. The first thing you'd notice would probably be the body. Neanderthals were generally shorter and much more heavily built than modern humans. They had powerful muscles, broad bodies, and large noses that may have helped warm and humidify cold, dry air. Their bodies were built for survival in harsh environments. And their brains? They weren't small. Neanderthal brains were roughly comparable in size to ours, and in some cases larger. These weren't mindless animals. They controlled fire. They made sophisticated stone tools. They hunted large animals. They used shelters. They wore clothing. And there is evidence that some Neanderthals deliberately buried their dead and sometimes placed objects or materials with them. So imagine meeting one. You wouldn't be looking at a monster. You would be looking at another human, just a different kind. Now, imagine Europe around 45,000 years ago. A group of Homo sapiens has moved into a landscape where Neanderthals have already lived for generations. The newcomers are entering someone else's world. The forests are full of animals. The caves have already been used. The rivers already have hunting grounds. The landscape contains information that the local people understand. And suddenly, another human population arrives. Scientists now have evidence that Homo sapiens reached parts of Europe earlier than once thought. At Grotte Mandrin in France, evidence suggests modern humans were present around 51,000 to 57,000 years ago, with archaeological layers indicating alternating occupation by Neanderthals and modern humans. Think about how strange that must have been. You see smoke rising from a distant valley. You approach, and you find another group. They're human, but they're different. Maybe you don't share the same language. Maybe you don't share the same customs. Maybe you don't even understand what they're saying. But you recognize something important. They know how to make fire. They know how to hunt. They know how to survive. And they're looking at you in exactly the same way. This is where the story becomes even stranger. Because these encounters weren't always violent. They weren't simply two groups fighting until one disappeared. Our ancestors and Neanderthals actually interbred. And we know this because of DNA. Modern people with ancestry outside Africa generally carry around 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, although the exact amount varies among populations. That means the Neanderthals didn't completely vanish from humanity. Part of them survived inside us. Somewhere thousands of years ago, a Neanderthal and a Homo sapiens met. And whatever happened between them, their descendants carried pieces of both populations into the future. So when people say the Neanderthals are extinct, that's true as a species, but it's also incomplete, because their genetic legacy is still alive. And then scientists discovered something even stranger. Another human population, the Denisovans. The discovery began with something incredibly small, a fragment of a finger bone found in Denisova cave in Siberia. Scientists extracted DNA from it, and the result was unexpected. It wasn't modern human DNA, and it wasn't Neanderthal DNA. It belonged to a previously unknown human population, the Denisovans. And suddenly, the human family tree became more complicated, because now there were at least 3 human populations moving through parts of Eurasia at the same time. Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. And they weren't completely separate. They interacted. They moved through overlapping regions. And they interbred. Scientists have even found evidence of an individual whose ancestry came from both a Neanderthal and a Denisovan parent. Imagine that. A child born tens of thousands of years ago, with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, or the reverse. A human being carrying the genetic history of 2 different ancient human populations in a single body. And we only know this because DNA survived long enough for us to find it. Here's the strange part. We know much less about the Denisovans than we know about Neanderthals. Why? Because we haven't found many Denisovan fossils. Scientists have recovered only a small number of remains that can confidently be linked to Denisovans, including material from Denisova cave and a Denisovan jaw from Tibet. So we have a bizarre situation. We know these people existed. We know they were related to Neanderthals. We know they interacted with Homo sapiens. And we know their DNA survives in some living populations today, but we still don't have a complete picture of what they looked like. It's almost like discovering an entire civilization from a few fingerprints. Except these fingerprints are inside our DNA. And the story gets even more interesting when we look toward the Pacific. Some present-day populations, particularly in parts of Oceania, carry substantial Denisovan ancestry. The Smithsonian notes that Denisovan genetic contributions can reach roughly 4 to 6% in some modern populations. So the Denisovans didn't simply disappear without a trace. Their descendants carried pieces of them across thousands of generations. Now leave Siberia, travel thousands of miles south, to an island called Flores in Indonesia. Because this is where human evolution gets weird. Really weird. Scientists discovered the remains of a tiny human species called Homo floresiensis. Its nickname? The Hobbit. And the name makes sense. Some individuals were only around 3 feet 6 inches tall. One famous skeleton, known as LB1, belonged to an adult female who was a little over 1 meter tall. Her estimated brain size was only around 400 cubic centimeters. But don't make the mistake of thinking small meant helpless. These tiny humans made stone tools. They hunted. They survived on an island filled with dangerous animals. They had to deal with giant Komodo dragons. And they live alongside unusual island wildlife, including small elephant-like animals called stegodon. Think about seeing one. You're standing in a tropical forest. You hear movement. A small human walks out. Not a child, an adult. A completely different human species, standing barely higher than your waist. And they know exactly what they're doing. They know the landscape. They know where food is. They know where danger lives. They have survived here for generations. This is where we have to be careful. Homo floresiensis fossils date to roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, while associated stone tools extend to around 50,000 years ago. Some earlier evidence suggests an ancestral population reached Flores much earlier. The timing means Homo sapiens may have arrived in the broader region around the period when Homo floresiensis disappeared. But scientists still don't have a simple answer proving exactly how the 2 populations interacted. And that uncertainty is important, because ancient history isn't a movie. We don't have a recording showing exactly what happened. We have bones, tools, fireplaces, sediments, and DNA. From those fragments, scientists reconstruct the story. And sometimes the honest answer is, we don't know yet. But the story doesn't stop with Neanderthals, Denisovans, and the Hobbit. Long before Homo sapiens spread across the planet, another human species had already traveled an astonishing distance. Homo erectus. They were among the earliest humans to expand far beyond Africa. They survived for an enormous span of time, long enough that different populations of Homo erectus lived across parts of Africa and Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Some populations even reached islands such as Flores long before modern humans existed. Stone tools on Flores suggest that early humans were present there around 1 million years ago, likely connected to the ancestry of Homo floresiensis. Think about what that means. Our ancestors weren't the first humans to explore the world. They weren't even close. Humans had already been moving across continents long before Homo sapiens appeared. Generation after generation, they walked farther, crossed new landscapes, entered new climates, and adapted. Now step back. Look at the entire picture. There was a time when the world didn't contain one kind of human. There were multiple. Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans across parts of Asia. Homo floresiensis on Flores. Homo erectus populations across large parts of Asia and beyond. And Homo sapiens expanding out of Africa. The human family wasn't a straight line. It was a tangled tree. Branches split. Branches overlapped. Some branches disappeared. Others mixed together. Some left descendants. Others left only bones. And this changes the way we should think about evolution. Because evolution isn't a race where one species wins first place. It's a process. Different human populations can exist at the same time. They can compete. They can cooperate. They can avoid one another. And sometimes, they can have children together. This is the biggest question. If these other humans were intelligent, if they could make tools, if they could control fire, if they could survive harsh environments, why are we the only humans left? The honest answer is that scientists don't have one simple explanation. The disappearance of Neanderthals, for example, may have involved several factors. Climate changes, small population sizes, competition, disease, demographic differences, and interactions with expanding Homo sapiens. The exact balance remains debated, and that's important, because it's tempting to tell a simple story. Modern humans were smarter, so everyone else disappeared. But the evidence is more complicated. Neanderthals survived for hundreds of thousands of years. That's not what failure looks like. They were successful for an incredibly long time. They simply didn't survive into the present. There is something almost unsettling about this. Imagine walking through Europe 45,000 years ago. You see another group of humans across the valley. They are not monsters. They aren't primitive animals. They are people. They have children. They have families. They know where the water is. They know where the animals move. They know how to make fire. They have their own memories, their own traditions, their own fears, their own dead. And they don't know that their entire population is eventually going to disappear. They have no idea that thousands of generations later, scientists will dig through their bones. They have no idea that their DNA will be compared with ours. They have no idea that people in the future will ask, "What happened to you?" And maybe that's the most beautiful part of the entire story. Because these ancient humans didn't leave absolutely nothing behind. They left tools. They left fire pits. They left footprints. They left bones. They left stories we are still trying to reconstruct. And some left something even more important. DNA. A small piece of Neanderthal ancestry. A trace of Denisovan ancestry. Tiny genetic fingerprints carried through generations. The people themselves are gone, but parts of them survived, inside people who are alive right now. So the next time you look at another human being, remember something strange. For most of our existence, that person standing beside you would not necessarily have been the only kind of human on Earth. There were others, humans with different bodies, different faces, different cultures, different histories. Some were stronger than us. Some were smaller. Some lived in frozen landscapes. Some lived on tropical islands. Some crossed enormous distances. And some met our ancestors, looked into their eyes, and shared the world with them. Then, slowly one branch remained. Us, Homo sapiens. But we aren't the story of humanity by ourselves. We're the last surviving chapter of a much bigger story. A story filled with humans who lived, loved, hunted, raised children, made fires, and eventually disappeared. And perhaps the strangest thing of all is this. When you look at yourself, You're not looking at a species that replaced everyone else completely. You're looking at what remains. After thousands of generations of humans met other humans and carried pieces of them forward, we didn't inherit an empty world. We inherited a world that was once full of people like us, but not quite like us. And for a very long time, we were never alone.